The salt wind off the Bight of Benin carried the smell of dried fish and burning palm husks as Adaeze picked her way down the rocky path toward the shoreline. She was 23 years old, unmarried in a village that had opinions about that, and the daughter of a dead fisherman whose debts she was still quietly paying off to men who never let her forget it. Her wrapper was the color of faded indigo, and her braids were tied back with a strip of orange cloth she had had since she was 16. She was not supposed to be at the waterline before the fishermen. There were many rules in Ijeleosa, and most of them seemed designed specifically to constrain women who had no husband to give them permission. But the best mud crabs were always in the shallows before the men arrived, and Adaeze had 7 to catch before anyone noticed. Then the net changed everything. It belonged to the Obiora brothers, 3 men unified only by their shared belief that the sea existed for their personal enrichment. The net had been staked just beyond the first sandbar overnight, and as the tide pulled back in the grey pre-dawn, it had dragged something to the surface that was not a fish, not entirely. A low, resonant keening cut through the morning air, not a scream, but something more ancient than a scream, something that bypassed the ears and registered deep in the bones. Adaeze stood still on the wet sand, basket forgotten at her feet. The shape inside the net was large. It moved with a desperate, weakening rhythm, pulling, going still, pulling again with the force of something running out of time. And just beneath the surface, unmistakable even in the grey pre-dawn light, iridescent scales caught the first pale glow of morning. She was already wading in. Ijeleosa was a fishing village on the coast of what old people still called the real Benin. Not the city, but the ancient coastal land, where the language had 17 words for different qualities of ocean light, and the shrines to Olokun, god of the deep water, were tended with more genuine devotion than the newer churches that had arrived with the asphalt road 30 years ago. Adaeze had been born here. Her father had been its most skilled net reader, the man who could look at the surface chop and tell you exactly where the mackerel were running 3 fathoms down. He had died of a fever when she was 17, leaving behind 2 unpaid boat loans, 1 grieving wife who followed him 6 months later, and Adaeze, who had simply remained. People in Ijeleosa were kind to her in the way people are kind to those they have quietly given up on. The headman's wife, Mama Ngozi, had attempted to arrange 3 separate introductions to eligible men over the past 4 years. Each one had dissolved, not dramatically, but quietly, the way things dissolve when a young woman is too direct, too self-sufficient, and insufficiently willing to perform the softness that is expected of her. Adaeze was not hard. She was simply honest, and in Ijeleosa, those 2 things had come to look the same. She caught her 7 crabs each morning, she repaired her own nets, and kept her small compound clean. She was, by every practical measure, completely fine, and she was, by every social measure Ijeleosa applied, a problem to be solved. None of that mattered at the moment she waded into the net. The water was cold, colder than it should have been for the season, with a deep current chill that rose around her knees and then her thighs as she pushed out toward the Seine. Her indigo wrapper soaked through immediately. Up close, the creature in the net was overwhelming. She was female, with the upper body of a woman perhaps a few years older than Adaeze, her skin a deep bronze gold that seemed to generate its own dim light independent of the rising sun. Her hair was thick and dark, weighted with small shells and water plants that had woven themselves into it organically, as though they belonged there. Her expression was beyond pain. It was the expression of someone who has moved through pain and arrived at something quieter and more final. From just above her hip bones, she became something else entirely. The tail was deep copper and emerald green, shifting between the two colors as the light moved, and even weakened and partially tangled, it radiated a power Adaeze could feel as a low vibration against her sternum. And her belly was round, unmistakably, heartbreakingly round. The creature's eyes opened. They were the color of the ocean at 20 fathoms, a shade that had no name in any language Adaeze had learned. "The net," she said. Her voice was layered, resonant, a sound you heard and also felt. "Please, I have been here since the tide turned." Her hand moved to her belly. The gesture was universal. "Please." Adaeze looked back at the shore, empty still. She had perhaps 20 minutes before the Obiora brothers arrived to check their catch. She began to walk on the mesh with her hands. If you can't stand people who would look at a mother trapped and suffering and see nothing but a payday, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Type "Nobody deserves that," because what the Obiora brothers would have done when they arrived is something this story does not let you forget. The knots were set tight against the water's pool. Adaeze walked methodically, the way her father had taught her to walk on tangled lines. Never pull against the resistance. Find the direction of the give. Walk with the knot's own logic until it surrenders. The third knot gave, then the fourth. A section of mesh fell away and the tail moved. A single powerful flex that sent a wave of displaced water crashing against Adaeze's chest and nearly knocked her off her feet. She walked the last section with both hands, found the give and pulled. The creature came free. The force sent them both sideways in the water, Adaeze going under briefly, surfacing with her braids plastered across her face. The mermaid moved in a long arc away from the net, then stopped, turned, and came back. She surfaced 3 feet from Adaeze. "Ejioma," she said. "I am called Ejioma." "Adaeze," Adaeze said, spitting salt water. Something in Ejioma's expression shifted from desperate assessment to something more considered, and underneath it all, deeply exhausted. "I cannot go back to the deep water tonight. The birth, it is coming sooner than..." She stopped. Her hand went to her belly. "Is there somewhere? A few days only." "Yes," Adaeze said before the question was fully formed. She looked at the shore. The Obiora brothers were beginning their morning walk down to the water. Still far, but coming. "We need to move now," Adaeze said. Adaeze's compound was the highest in the village, an inconvenience she had always resented and now was grateful for, because the path to it cut behind the cassava fields and bypassed the main village road entirely. She had a handcart and a tarpaulin she used for drying fish. They moved in the grey light, and Adaeze taking the steep back path at a pace that left her lungs burning. Ejioma lying beneath the tarpaulin with the stillness of someone who had committed entirely to trusting another person's judgment. The compound was small: one sleeping room, one cooking area, a herb garden, and a covered storage space larger than the sleeping room itself, with a cool clay floor shaded on all sides. It was not comfortable by any standard most people would recognize. It was, by every standard that mattered, exactly enough. Ejioma lay on the spread tarpaulin and looked up at the thatched ceiling. She said, "You live alone?" Adaeze said, "Yes." She said, "They don't like that." Adaeze looked at her. "How do you know?" Ejioma said, "We watched the shore." Ejioma said, something ancient and slightly amused in her expression. "We have watched this shore for a very long time. We know the ones who live alone and why." Adaeze absorbed that. "Rest," she said. "I will bring water." She had 3 days before everything unraveled. In those 3 days, she fetched twice her usual water, bought more food at the market than her basket normally required, and declined 2 invitations to evening conversation at her neighbor Chisom's veranda. Chisom noticed. Chisom always noticed. On the second evening, Obiora Chukwuka, eldest of the 3 brothers, was sitting on the low wall at her compound entrance when she returned from market. He was large and certain of himself in the way that men who have never been seriously questioned tend to be. "My net was tampered with," he said. Many things happen to nets in the water at night. Dolphins, sharks, the current was strong. The knots were worked from outside. His eyes, slow and methodical like a man reading water depth, moved over her face. "Someone caught my catch loose." "Then you lost a night's worth of mackerel," she said. "That happens also." She stepped past him through her gate. "Good evening, Chukwuka." He left in the manner of a man who has written something down. On the 3rd day, Ejioma's labor began. If you believe a woman should be able to do the right thing without her whole community turning on her for it, hit that subscribe button. People like Chukwuka don't believe that. And what he set in motion when he couldn't find his answers is the part of this story that will stay with you. Adaeze had attended 2 human births before, both times as the person told to stay out of the way. She had no training for what happened in her storage room in the grey hours of the 4th morning. What she had was presence and steadiness and the practical intelligence of someone who had spent her life solving problems with whatever was available. Ejioma was extraordinary in labor, focused in a way that seemed to draw on resources Adaeze could not see. Adaeze held her hands when she needed holding, brought cool and warm water alternately, and spoke without false reassurance. Not "it will be fine," which she did not know, but "I am here, and you are strong, and keep going," which were all demonstrably true. The child arrived as the sun began to rise. Small, perfect, and covered in the thinnest imaginable layer of iridescence, like the inside of an abalone shell, translated into skin. Her lower half was, for now, simply legs, small and kicking, a mercy for the transition into air. Ejioma held her daughter and wept without sound. "Neka," she said softly. It meant mother is supreme. Her name is Neka. It was Chisom who saw, not intentionally. She had come to check on Adaeze in the early morning, meaning to leave yam at the door, and heard something from the storage room that she could not explain. She did not open the door, She simply stood outside it long enough to know that something profound was happening inside and left, quickly, without yam. By midday, the village knew. They came to her compound in the early afternoon, a delegation, Mama Ngozi at the front, Chukwuka behind her left shoulder, 4 village elders behind them, and a cluster of neighbors at a respectful distance. Mama Ngozi was a woman of genuine authority and genuine good intention, which made her in this moment more difficult than someone acting from pure malice. Pure malice can be argued with. Genuine good intention expressed as social pressure is nearly impossible to dislodge. "We are worried about you," Mama Ngozi said. "There are things being said." "Things are always being said," Adaeze replied. "People say you have been keeping something in your compound, something from the water. You know what the elders say about bringing water spirits onto land." "Those are stories," Adaeze said. "You are alone here," said Chukwuka, and his voice carried the particular satisfaction of a man who has been waiting for an opening. An unmarried woman, no family to speak for her, and now this. The village cannot be responsible for what follows if you have brought something cursed here. The words landed precisely where they were aimed. The reminder that Adaeze existed in Ijele Osa without the protections that family and husband provided. That she was already slightly outside the boundary of what was fully sanctioned. "Then open your storage room," said Chukwuka. "No," she said. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. "Mama Ngozi, you are a good woman, and I know you mean well," Adaeze said quietly. "But Chukwuka is here because he is angry about his net, and he has dressed that anger in concern for the village. My compound is my compound. I have done nothing wrong, and I am asking you all, respectfully, to leave." Nobody left immediately, but nobody entered either. After a long, uncomfortable moment, Mama Ngozi turned, and the delegation followed, and Adaeze closed her gate and stood alone in her compound with her heart hammering and her hands very still at her sides. That evening, someone painted a warning mark on her gate, old village sign for a contaminated place, the kind of mark that made people walk past quickly without looking. Comment: standing with Adaeze if you're on her side. The village chose suspicion over compassion, and a young woman who did nothing wrong is being punished for it. Now watch what happens when the 7th morning finally comes. Ejoma was strong enough by the 6th night. She had spent the day in the storage room holding Neka, feeding her, singing in that layered, resonant voice that Adaeze had come to find the most beautiful sound she had ever had. "The village mark on your gate," Ejoma said when Adaeze came for her. "It will wash off," Adaeze said. "You lost something for us." "I found something instead," Adaeze said, and meant it entirely. The 6 days of Ejoma and Neka in her storage room had been the least lonely 6 days of her adult life. They went down in the dark by the back path. Adaeze carried Neka in the crook of one arm, the baby watching the night sky with the serious attention of a creature encountering stars for the first time. At the water's edge, Ejoma took her daughter back and looked at Adaeze. 7 days, she said. "Count from now, not sunrise. Count from this moment." What happens at 7 days? Ejoma smiled, wide and warm, carrying in it something that had nothing to do with ordinary human gladness. Count, she said, you will know. She entered the water with Neka, and the sea closed over them without so much as a ripple. Adaeze stood at the shore for a long time. Then she walked home through the dark. She did not tell the village she was counting. She went to market with the gate mark still on her wood and the village's sidelong eyes still following her. Sold her crabs, came home, mended her nets, and counted the days in the private interior space that no village opinion had ever successfully colonized. The warning mark faded in the rain on the 4th day. Nobody put a new one up. Chisom came on the 5th day and sat on the veranda without speaking for a while. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to. I know, Adaeze said. What was it? Chisom asked, genuinely. Something that needed help, Adaeze said, and got it. The 7th morning arrived like any other, pre-dawn gray, the smell of the sea, the cockerel somewhere across the compound wall. She opened her door. The shore was visible from her high position, and there, drawn up onto the sand at the foot of her hill path, were 3 vessels, not chests, boats. 3 wooden fishing boats built with a craftsmanship that was simply not possible by ordinary hands, their hulls carved in deep patterns that seemed to shift in the early light. Each was rigged with a net already full, not of ordinary mackerel and crayfish, but of something that flashed and moved with the quality of things that had never before come willingly to shore. The village saw them at the same time. Of course they did. By the time the sun was fully up, all of Ijele-Osa was at the waterline. Mama Ngozi, Chukwuka, Chisom, the elders, the neighbors who had watched in silence when the delegation came to her gate, all of them standing before something they had no framework to explain. Adaeze walked down through the parting crowd without hurrying. She did not look at Chukwuka. She did not perform vindication or triumph. Those were the expressions of people who had needed to be right, and she had never needed that. She had needed to be useful, which was different. She put her hand on the hull of the nearest boat. The wood was warm beneath her palm, warmer than the morning air could account for, and underneath it she felt the faintest vibration, like a note sustaining itself from very far away. She turned and faced the village. "These are for all of us," she said, "for the cooperative, not mine." The silence that followed was different from the silence at her gate. That had been the silence of people consolidating judgment. This was the silence of people taking apart something they thought they had already understood. Mama Ngozi stepped forward, her face holding something Adaeze had never seen on it before. Not quite shame, but its precursor, the expression of someone revising. "Adaeze," she began. "There is nothing that needs saying," Adaeze said, not unkindly. "But if you want to be useful, we should get these boats above the tide line before the water turns." They walked together all morning, all of them. Chukwuka pulled rope alongside her for 2 hours in the rising heat without a word, and that silence was, she supposed, its own kind of language. The 3 boats changed everything. Their combined catch that year exceeded the previous 3 years together. The cooperative sold one boat to fund the village water cistern that had been half built and abandoned for a decade. Adaeze was asked to represent the cooperative at the Regional Fishing Council, unprecedented for an unmarried woman in Ijeliosa, and she accepted without letting on how much she found that amusing. She continued to live alone in her compound on the hill. She continued to wake before dawn. The gate mark was long gone, and no one suggested it should return. Chisom came for evening conversation 3 times a week without fail, and Adaeze always had palm wine ready. Some evenings at the waterline, when the light was exactly right and the tide moved in a certain way, she could make out something far beyond the first sandbar, a ship, graceful and unhurried, moving through the current with the ease of something that belongs entirely to where it is. On those evenings, she stayed a little longer than was necessary, watching the water with the patient attention of someone who has learnt that the deep keeps its own time and its own accounts. Mercy given freely, given in fear, given with no guarantee, finds its way back. The sea is old, it forgets nothing, and it had seen Adaeze wade into that net on a grey morning when she had every reason not to, and it had written it down. If you watched all the way to this moment, drop the country you are watching from in the comments. Represent where you are. Let's see how far across the water this story traveled.